from Paul George. Georgie, get up there. You don't deserve to be the number 5 spot. You should really be in the number 2 spot on this list. But just past Paul George, here at the number 4 spot, we have a guy who's nowhere near the defensive player that Paul George is. Nowhere near the defensive player that CJ McCollum is. And but well, we were talking earlier about a player like Zach LaVine, about how if you're gonna make it into the top 5, you either need to be around his level but raise his game defensively, or raise his points per game to over 30. Guess what? This guy did. Bradley Beal here at number 4. He's probably not going to do it with another running mate there like Westbrook. Again, George had a career year with Westbrook. We're just talking about that. It's not that bad of a time. Being on a team with a player that can drive and dish that as well as Westbrook, he's going to leave Beal open a lot. Open like he's never been. That being said, Beal could be even higher if he was better defensively. The man didn't even make an All-Star game last year. He put up 30 points per game, but his team didn't reflect that. I just wish he was a little better on defense.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's a completely false accurate accusation for Bradley Beal, where he's actually one of the better defenders at the shooting guard position. He was a guy who was tied for 5th in steals with 1.3, but not only that, he's one of the strongest guys at the shooting guard position, and he has been since he's come out of college. He's huge. He loves getting down and gritty. He's not a guy who gets burned on the defensive end night after night. Like, of course, if you have a team that is struggling, and yes, you have other guys like Thomas Bryant and company who are
that whole team was struggling defensively.
they were, but Bradley Beal is not a bad defender hit alone by any means. Like when Bradley Beal has like even James, like we'd say the same about Harden. He wants to play defense, of course he can. To say that about a player, of course, not what you want to say. But Bradley Beal, it's not something that I sit here and would say, oh, if he was better on defense, he'd be so much higher. I just think he's not higher because right now that team isn't that good, and everyone else has such a huge contribution on teams that have looked really good lately.
Well, we haven't seen someone else from a different team in a sunny state yet, but that player didn't have a better team success year and had less in almost every statistical category. And we haven't seen him yet. I think Beal, as much as you're right, it's like statistically you look at it and you think, wow, it's not bad on defense, yeah. But I think having people like Davis Bertans and Thomas Bryant, Dale Lowe, just showcase that without Wall there, I think Wall above average defender, and without Wall there and without having the safety nets that he used to have in the past behind him, I think that the other team was really hurt on that sense, especially when you compare him to different players that we have around this area. And maybe that's just because of how horrible they were on the interior, but that interior just wasn't it. Every person that he let got by him, but whether he let him by or they blew past him, whatever the case may be, maybe it didn't. Maybe it happened just as much as it happened to any other player, but it just felt like they were scoring every single time.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a couple of things where obviously, like if we do look, like you are correct in the fact that if you look at Bradley Beal in the 2019-2020 season, he was one of the worst defensive real plus minus players. But that's not something that has been consistent over his career. He's usually average or better than average at the very worst. It's really just been the last year and a half or so that he struggled on the defensive end, not only because he has no counterparts to support him, there's no help defense being played, whatever it may be, but his usage rate is so much higher now that they're relying
Tired.
on so much, exactly, they're relying on him so much on the offensive end that when you're being relied on night after night on that end and there's no result on the defensive end from anyone else, like you have the mindset of why would I even play defense? Like I know I could go bucket for bucket. These guys aren't helping me anyway. Why would I bust my ass? I'm already doing it on one end. So it's clearly that's where it is becoming a bit more staggering, which is concerning in its own right, where you would love a guy who on every play is out there hustling, he's jumping for loose balls and whatever it may be. And Bradley Beal, like you said, he almost seems a bit lackadaisical last year on the defensive end.
Lackadaisical, I like it.
but it's not something, yeah, like I said, that is consistent. Like overall, I would rank Beal as a good defender. Like I said, he's very strong. It's always been a huge thing for him, even coming out of college. But yeah, I mean, on offense, it can't be denied, right? He was second in
He's
points.
amazing.
Yeah, second in points at 30.6, and I believe post All-Star break he was actually first. He had above 35 points per game. He was also third in assists at shooting guard with 6.1, which is something I feel like a lot of people forget about him. And not a bad rebound either by any means. So overall, just I'd say Bradley Beal is very well rounded. I would love to see his defensive stats come back to center so people don't think that he is such a bad defender because, like you said recently, that has been the knock on him. Because a guy who puts up 30 points per game should easily be two on this list.
It just blows me away that he was an All-Star 2 years ago. He was an All-Star 3 years ago. His team still made the playoffs last year, or if they didn't, they were ninth place. Blows me away that like he didn't get an All-Star nod last year. It just like even when you're putting someone like Middleton against him. Middleton was an All-Star last year. I know that he was on a way better team, but Bradley Beal put up 30 points.
Yeah,
The only player to put up 30 points and not become an All-Star.
yeah, and I mean it really is just the post All-Star numbers. It's unfortunate when it happened, but I mean 36 points per game post All-Star, 29 pre. But even then, putting up 29 points per game,
29!
that doesn't get you an All-Star nod. I mean,
And he had it the year before at less points. He had it the year before that, even less points. And it's not like Washington was a top 4 seed.
yeah, no. And I mean, personally, Bradley Beal always been one of my personal favorite players.
Oh, I know.
So it's a guy who, again, the fact that he's in his prime, and we're obviously seeing that team decline definitely sucks. I hope they look better this year with Russell Westbrook. And if that is the case, we can maybe see Beal go into the top three because I don't think he's necessarily a lot worse than these guys. Like you said, though, last year with that horrible defensive rating and Washington struggling on that end, it hurts him a bit, clearly, because like, he was so good on the offensive end, and somehow he still finds himself below two guys that he was actually a lot better than, even though they are great in their own rights.
I think that if it's tough, right? Because Beal probably had a better year than most of the guys. He had one of the better years of anyone in the league, especially with his post All-Star break numbers, bubble numbers. He was not a bad player. But let's just say I think that he's going to keep being a good player on that team. And I think that he's gonna have some success on that team. And I think him and Westbrook are actually gonna fit very well. But we have to see it happen first, right? And that's what it comes down to for me.
All right, so who do you have at number 3 then?
So just after